Hello, hello, good evening, and welcome to your Thursday night edition of the Wrestling Inc. podcast. I'm your host, the content machine, Liam Crowley, joined by one of my favorite crews to share this virtual stage with, back again for the first time in, I believe, a month. For the first, to my immediate left, the man behind the machine, Wrestling Inc. founder and owner, Mr. Raj Giri. Raj, it is always a pleasure to share this screen with you just about every single week. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you guys?
I'm good, and I just want to say your hair is looking good. I see you adjusting it all over the place. I think the slightly messy look is working for you, so I'm a fan off the top.
I just got out of the shower and put it together, so it's kind of annoying me, but
I think you're looking good. To my far left, we got a man covering up his hair with a nice little Under Armour hat. You've heard him on Busted Open Radio. You've seen him inside the International Wrestling Cartel ring. It's Mr. Justin LaBar. Justin, it is great to share this screen with you once again. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Great to be back with you, Liam, and Raj again. And there's very little hair. That's not really, I was a little late to the Keeps party.
Didn't jump on Keeps early enough.
Fair enough. Well, hey, here we are to talk a bit of wrestling news, but also we're going to venture into the world of entertainment. That's what we do on the Thursday night edition of the Wrestling Inc. podcast. Half Squared Circle, half Hollywood. And this week, the Hollywood side of things, it's something that I know Raj has wanted to do for a very long time. He's been giving Justin a hard time about not seeing this movie. We're talking Rocky III in the back half of this edition of the Wrestling Inc. podcast. But before we get there, we have some pro wrestling news to dive into. Starting things off with that new Performance Center class. WWE officially announced earlier today a brand new batch of recruits heading over to the Performance Center, going to report to NXT 2.0 eventually. Some names that stuck out: Fallon Henley and Kayla Inlay, already a part of that NXT 2.0 brand. Other familiar names, the one that everyone's going to be talking about is inaugural Ring of Honor Women's Champion Roxy. We also have indie wrestler Nikita Knight, indie wrestler Jake Tucker, Santino Marella's daughter Bianca Corelli, indie wrestler Cole Carter, and indie wrestler the Notorious Mimi, as well as some other mainly athletes. Raj, I want to go to you first. From this Performance Center class, and I feel like I already know the answer, what's the name that stands out?
Well, yeah, there are those two. Roxy, I believe, she's got the credentials. I see big things for her. And, Santino Marella's daughter, Bianca Corelli, she's also, I feel like she's got something. I've seen some of her stuff, and she's got definitely a star power to her. So definitely those two. For
sure. And Justin, how about you? Any names that stick out?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's two of them that I have a personal kind of, hope to see how they do, that are from right here in the Pittsburgh area. One is Pittsburgh, and Nikita Knight. She is just got finished high school. I mean, so but she's been on the scene here in the Pittsburgh area. She's 18 years old. So, obviously always rooting for somebody who's here from the local scene. And then Cole Carter, he came up with us here at IWC Wrestling. He's a young man who, he's not quite as young as 18, but he's still very young, in phenomenal shape. I mean, he has got, he is built, but he is a hell of a babyface. The girls just flocked him. He has a babyface repertoire. He can do it all, but he's got impact. I was on the receiving end of a suicide dive from him about 8 months ago. I mean, he's got a pretty interesting repertoire. So I'm keeping my eye on, obviously, on Cole, and wish him luck. And then the other more known names that Raj just touched on. So this is an interesting mix of a class.
It is an interesting mix, as you mentioned, athletes and pro wrestlers. We do have our first super chat I want to highlight here from Joel Wood. He says, that seems like a lot of independent workers for a company that supposedly, quote, wasn't hiring indie workers anymore. I would push back on this a little bit, because I was doing some digging and seeing other PC classes in the past, and it seemed to be more 80-20 in terms of the split between indie wrestlers and athletes. Now it seems a lot more athlete focused. Raj, did you notice the numbers kind of changing with this PC class?
Well, I think what Joel was referring to was there were, reports that WWE was completely stopping indie wrestlers and they were only doing athletes. And, I kind of wonder with some of those if people, and maybe even some reporters took that the wrong way. Like, maybe they're not looking for the quote unquote indie wrestler type, but they would take someone that looks like a star that is on the independent scene. Like there is, kind of the stereotypical indie wrestler, and maybe that's not what they're looking for, but they will be taking talent off the independent scene.
Yeah, I never interpreted it as maybe the way that Joel was saying and how Raj is alluding to. I think, WWE knows, that still where the conflict takes place is still in a quote unquote wrestling ring. And so you still have to have your eye on people who already have some level of training, passion, and understanding of that part of the entertainment. But like I said, Nikita Knight, 18 years old. So you get them while they're young, and they can still, you can still mold them in the direction of WWE wants. I think the way I interpret at least the wasn't hiring any more indie workers. They're done with the days of hiring a Samoa Joe or somebody who is a top name everywhere else and who's going to come in and they're going to pay an immediate, six-figure price to. I think those days for now are done. You can be somebody who has worked on the indies for several years in the case of some of these guys and girls, but just know we don't care what few titles you might have held in whatever organizations. You're coming back in, you are bottom of the barrel, you're making the starting money, and you're going through the different level of classes. So you're not coming in, your indie fame is not going to buy you an immediate main event in NXT, because of course NXT is not that anymore. So that's how I interpret it, Joel.
Yeah, you kind of took the words out of my mind there, because as you mentioned too, some of these indie wrestlers, they're not the indie wrestlers, or they don't match that definition that a lot of people associate with people being on the scene for 10 plus years. Like someone like Sami Callihan is technically a former WWE superstar. No one treats him like a former WWE superstar. Nikita Knight, 18 years old, only competing on the indie scene for a couple months. Roxy saw tremendous success, but she's only 21, I believe. So I still think they match the credentials with what WWE is looking for in terms of going after younger talent that have proven stuff, given them some potential early on. They just want to tap into it a little bit more. Raj, I have another question for you based on this class, though. What is the ceiling for whoever you see as being the most successful? If that's a Cole Carter, if that's a Roxy, where do you see their ceiling being in WWE as a whole, not just NXT?
I mean, that totally depends. I mean, it could be, a couple opening matches at NXT and then you're gone, or not even making it to NXT, or headlining WrestleMania. I guess it all depends on how quickly you take to it, how the fans react to you, and what kind of booking you're given. And there's just so many things that can happen.
Yeah, so many things can happen. Injuries, and then a million other things in terms of is it working for you? Are you willing to grind it out for however many months or years at whatever pay, living in whatever townhouse in Orlando with roommates and all kinds of things. But I will say this, I do think obviously there's going to be, out of this class, probability is not all of them are going to make it onto NXT television. Probability is maybe a third, right? I will say, I think now, given the way NXT 2.0 is and how we're seeing things restructured within the WWE umbrella, I do think if you make it onto NXT television consistently, I do think there is more probability, and the ceiling is raised, that you will at least get some reps on Raw or SmackDown. Whether or not you get over on Raw or SmackDown, whether or not you get a cup of tea there, and a cup of coffee there, and you're cut or whatever. But I do think now, if you do make it on NXT TV regularly, it's a whole lot more likely you will make it to Raw or SmackDown for some tryout period, where that wasn't the case in the past.
Yeah, I like that. A lot of people saying too, the whole revamping of NXT, kind of going away with NXT as a third brand, going back to the developmental days, but making that road to the main roster a lot more smooth in terms of the pavement and whatnot. I will say, I don't know about high ceilings for some of these people on a main roster, but one thing I'm confident in saying is I see Roxy as a future NXT Women's Champion. I think that is almost a given based on this class, just based on her talent. I was fortunate to represent Wrestling Inc. at Death Before Dishonor this past fall, and we got to see Roxy live in person, and she was just a wonder to watch in the ring. And then it made me feel bad that she was somehow younger than me. And I know I'm the resident young guy on the site. When I see someone being that successful at an age younger than me, her ceiling is unbelievably high. Entering WWE at this age, I think, is only going to aid her. And I think she's built for success. And I guess we'll see in the coming months, because she could be on NXT TV sooner than later, given her experience with Ring of Honor and all that. Let's move on, though, to outside of WWE, AEW and New Japan, a relationship that's been, speculated on ever since Kenta showed up in, I believe it was the summer of 2020 on AEW programming. And then occasionally we'd see some crossover. We saw Tomohiro Ishii once in a blue moon, I believe. We also got to see, why am I blanking on his name? He has so many matches. Minoru Suzuki obviously had a big run in AEW, and it got some speculation running on whether or not we could see a full-on show between these two companies. Well, Nick Hausman of the Wrestling Inc. Daily had both Rocky Romero and Luke Gallows on the show earlier today, and he asked about this joint super show that could potentially go down between AEW and New Japan. And Rocky said, and I quote, "I mean, anything is possible for sure. I know that it is what the fans want. It's definitely still really difficult for us because we are two touring brands in two different countries," referencing New Japan Strong and New Japan Proper. "We've got the US touring brand and the Japanese touring brand, which is constantly touring. It's just hard logistic-wise for sure, but if AEW is open to it, I think New Japan would be open to it as well." Justin, I'll go to you first. A pretty general question. Will this ever happen? New Japan and AEW sharing the stage for one giant show?
Yeah, I think it's very likely. Maybe it happens a little bit later than it would have otherwise, as we continue to watch and see how COVID-19 is, or are we getting towards the end of the pandemic? But I do think at some point we will get that. It just seems inevitable. Tony Khan is, we've seen him, obviously he's purchased ROH. We've seen him, have some NWA crossover. I mean, quite frankly, this is just this is never going to happen as long as Vince McMahon's in control. Quite frankly, Tony Khan, he would probably listen to if the business made sense to do something with WWE if they ever approached him. Which, as long as Vince is in control, that's never going to happen. But Tony seems very open to working with anybody. He doesn't acknowledge he doesn't pretend and not acknowledge that there's not other companies. So yeah, I just think this is natural, especially with the fact that he now owns Ring of Honor. That, when Ring of Honor was owned separately, that might have been maybe one sticking point of, okay, we're going to see AEW and New Japan work together and not Ring of Honor get in the mix, because Ring of Honor has had New Japan, joint shows. So now that Tony has both, I think it's absolutely inevitable. How it gets done, is it like the January 4th show you see over in Japan, or how they do it, where they do it, all that stuff? No clue, but it is inevitable there will be some mega show in the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see it happening. I think it makes, Impact working with AEW, it never made sense to me from the AEW side, just because I felt like they had nothing to gain. And really, ultimately, when you watch what happened, they really didn't get anything other than having Gallows and Anderson show up, with Kenny Omega. But outside of that, it didn't really make much sense. But New Japan, it does. They have a ton of talent that they could send over to Japan to work there. They have a bunch of talent that could come here. As far as doing a joint show, I could easily see it happening. I do think a lot of the buzz for New Japan has gone down since AEW started and since the pandemic, kind of a combination of the two. I think AEW fits a lot of the stuff that New Japan audiences were looking for, fans in the US were looking for. And they've gotten a little cold. I mean, you look at, they're back on Access, and you look at the kind of numbers that they're doing. They did 50,000 last week, 50,000 total viewers. And, I just think it's really cold right now. But I think doing a joint show with AEW could help heat them up again, especially here stateside.
It could be fun. And I agree. I do think it is something that will happen eventually. It just depends on the scope of it in terms of how much New Japan talent will migrate over. Will this be a straight up Survivor Series-esque thing, Raw versus SmackDown, all only New Japan talent versus AEW talent, kind of like War of the Worlds, which what Ring of Honor used to do a couple years ago. A question I have for you guys now is kind of doing some fantasy booking with a potential New Japan and AEW joint show. Raj, I'll go to you first for this one. Any dream matchups you have between AEW's current roster and who we got on the New Japan side of things?
I think Danielson versus Okada comes to mind. Danielson versus Will Ospreay. Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay. Mm-hmm. Naito versus CM Punk. I mean, there's some really cool ones you could do. Yeah, just again, it's also booking who wins and who loses, because I know Tony Khan doesn't want whoever's AEW champion losing to the IWGP champion, and so that becomes a whole different thing. But yeah, there's a ton.
Justin, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I know of Okada and Ospreay. I've seen some of their bigger matches, so I can totally relate to what Raj just said. But I don't follow New Japan well enough to feel like I can best gauge what's going to be deemed as a dream match. I also then, I'm the pessimist, I guess, to the AEW or New Japan diehards, where I will then ask the question when asked, what's the dream match if these two companies work together? You have to work about the politics of who's going over. It's also a matter of like, where is it taking place? What's the audience? Because I mean, there's again, if you're a diehard, you have, putting Will Ospreay or Okada in there with some of the big names over in AEW, that is a big deal. But it goes back to that thing of like, you're trying to draw in new fans, and not everybody's going to be familiar or understand the gravity of what it is to somebody who does follow all these promotions globally. So, where it's at, what it's trying to accomplish. Is it for free? Is it a pay-per-view? That makes a big difference. I mean, if it's to free, you really got to think about, okay, are you trying to, what can you get some new people in? If it's something you're paying for and you're relying on the hardcore, different scenario, then I think you can get a little bit more into the into the weeds. You don't need to explain as much. You can just assume that everybody that's paying the money knows everybody. So I really can't give beyond what Raj said again, but I really can't give much more because I don't think I'd have a fair gauge of what's worthy of dream match status.
Yeah, who goes over is the big conundrum, and that's going to be a very difficult thing whenever these kind of joint shows come up. I know it's something that whenever War of the Worlds was going on, that would be a big conundrum of, dividing wins and losses, because each company is going to want kind of an even amount of 50-50 split, and they're going to want certain guys to go over and maybe be okay with certain guys losing. A guy I want to see in an AEW ring 100% is Will Ospreay. I don't really care who he matches up against. I just think he's money. I think he's built for American television in terms of just being on cable week in and week out. And yeah, him versus Omega would be something special. Him versus CM Punk. I know that's the guy he was calling out for months before Punk returned to the ring. Him versus Danielson would be really cool. Very recently was calling out Jon Moxley. I think that could be a fun matchup, kind of lean into Ospreay's more hardcore side. I don't know. I'm a bit of an Ospreay junkie, as you can tell. And I'm sure I'd love to see guys like Okada and Tanahashi and Ishii also. But Ospreay is the money name. And I think having him in the main event against whoever your top dog is in at AEW at that time, I think that'd be money. Raj, I'm getting some reactions from you.
Slide the camera to the right so we can see the Ospreay posters you have on there.
All the posters it's an empty wall. They're over in Syracuse.
I was just gonna say, Jay White is someone that would have been in that mix. I think like 6 months ago. I feel like him coming in and working Impact and kind of doing these really minor things on AEW TV has kind of brought his buzz down. But he's someone else I would have put in that mix.
Mm-hmm. And Gorillas of Destiny, too. If we're going to talk some tag team action, Tama Tonga, Tonga Loa, I think they'd have a banger match with FTR. I think a nice little scrappy fight. No flips, just fists, as FTR likes to say. I think it could be fun. But one guy we know wouldn't be on that AEW New Japan Super Show is one Joey Janela, an AEW original who never really got used too much on television. He had that whole storyline with Sonny Kiss, mostly used on Dark and Dark Elevation, announcing, I believe it was on Denise Alcido's podcast or her YouTube show, that he was not intending to renew his AEW contract, which kind of contradicts what he was saying in previous weeks where, we'll get to that eventually, and just kind of brushing it off like re-signing was inevitable. But hey, here we are, Joey Janela possibly being one of the first to depart AEW, aside from Cody Rhodes, obviously, but he's a guy that was at that AEW announcement press conference. He was one of the bigger signings when they first announced AEW coming into fruition, given his history with booking his own shows, Joey Janela's Spring Break and all. News that honestly didn't take me by surprise, given the fact that he hasn't been utilized too much on AEW television. And if there's not interest from AEW, there's likely not interest from Joey Janela sticking around a company that doesn't want to use him too much. Raj, I'll go to you first on this one. What are your thoughts on Joey Janela likely leaving AEW when his contract expires?
When I heard it, it kind of seemed to me like he was saving face a little bit. They clearly hadn't been using him. He clearly wasn't in their plans.
Baker Mayfield requesting a trade today.
Yeah, right. So, it just, and when there have been a couple, Marco Stunt was released, or not released, sorry, his contract wasn't renewed when it came up. So you kind of see the wrestlers that aren't being used, and you can kind of feel the lay of the land on who might be staying and who might be going. And at some point, AEW has to start cutting back a little bit because they have so many people on their roster that aren't getting TV time. Joey Janela, he had stuff here and there that they looked like they were starting him off with. He had that thing with Sonny Kiss. I think they blew it off on a TV match, maybe. I already forget.
Yeah.
They seemed like they were teasing something with him and Kip Sabian, and then that kind of went nowhere. No, it's it just seems to me like they weren't going to keep him, and whether it was ultimately Janela's decision or not, they weren't going to anyway. Is what it feels like to me.
Yeah, I mean, look, he was he's one of the foundation first talents they announced at that press conference, right? That pep rally.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, and mind you, the talent pool was far more limited, at least in America. WWE had not yet gone on the releasing, splurge that they would later do. Janela was a bigger name to get just because he was so entrepreneurial, and he had his spring break stuff. He was a name out there. He was one of the kings of the indies, we'll just say. So I understood them. You're trying to build a company and you're trying to just get talent and get a following. So I understood that, but it quickly kind of became that realized that whether it was his look, whether it was his commitment to improving his look and his style and being valuable for them, it just felt like it never quite clicked. I wonder if Joey understood the opportunity he was given, and it's like, okay, dude, this is not show up for one pay night and jump off something crazy. Like it's a little more corporate, a little more business. I don't know, but I do think it was a saving face. I think he was probably informed by Tony Khan, hey, your contract's coming up, and thank you for your contributions, but we are not going to be renewed. And I think Tony Khan probably, if Tony truly knew that he wasn't, Tony is the kind of person who's going to give you proper notice so you can start making plans beyond. And then I think that's where Janela's tune changes. Okay, well, I'm not going to be back there. I have a hard time believing that Joey Janela, even if not being used regularly, I would hope not, but maybe his business mind is just different. I would hope that he wouldn't, you're getting a steady paycheck, even if you're not having to take bumps. Or even, okay, yeah, maybe not on Dynamite, but you're getting a steady paycheck, and you're getting far better treatment than you're going to get having to, hustle each weekend, be a weekend warrior. I don't know. I just, and maybe to him, he thinks, oh, I want to go be king of the indies again. Maybe that's where his mind works, and he thinks that's better. I guess, again, power to the courage of the entrepreneur, but I don't know, man. I saw some of the stunts that he did on the indies, some of the crazy hardcore stunts, and it's like, dude, you don't have to do that in AEW. And again, you're getting a paycheck, and I don't know. I'm not surprised though. They never. What was the biggest match he had? Didn't he have a match? Didn't he have a Moxley match? That's probably the biggest one, right?
That was Moxley's first match. Well, he had he had the big match with Moxley. Was his first match. I believe it was on either one of the early shows that they gave away for free that they ended up turning into, whether it was a Fighter Fest. That's what it was. Fighter Fest, John Moxley, Joey Janela, big hardcore match. But yeah, we have a comment here from Issa in the chat, NYC Demon Diva. According to him, no one has communicated with him. Yeah, I did see in the interview him mentioning the fact that communication was kind of just cut off, and he was just kind of not really hearing updates. And while, we might speculate on whether or not he was trying to save face here, we recently heard the whole thing with Chavo Guerrero, where he found out he wasn't really a part of the company anymore because his roster page was moved to alumni. And that kind of caught him by surprise. So maybe this is a running theme with AEW, that there are some communication issues. Raj, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's where, Vince McMahon, he has his bad guys over the years, whether it's Jim Ross or, someone who could be the guy that tells people that they're not going to renew their contracts or that they're going to be released. And I'm sure it's a lot better for them to hear it firsthand that they're not going to be used or they're not going to be renewed than to find out, on the internet. So, Tony Khan's got a billion things going on. He probably should have someone put in that role, and not deal with all talent one-on-one.
Yeah, it's not a WWE situation. It's not this giant machine. It's not a giant writer's room. Tony has taken the lead on the creative. He doesn't have a John Laurinaitis or he has QT Marshall is really instrumental week to week with him backstage. He has a lot of the other veteran names are instrumental in terms of working as agents or whatever. But formally, yeah, he doesn't have like in WWE, like, you know, unless you are, you know, a certain name. If you're getting cut, right now it's back to Laurinaitis, right? John Laurinaitis is the guy that's gonna make the call and tell you that. You know, so yeah, I think Chavo and Joey Janela, they got in on the ground floor when it was still a startup, and Tony's responsibilities maybe weren't as crazy as they are now. And now, you know, Tony's got a lot going on, so there's only so many hours in the day, and I have to imagine he's going to take the phone calls first of the MJFs and CM Punks and the Britt Bakers and the people that he's making money with right now, and he's an active booking with right now, that they're probably going to get the first call back before he calls Joey Janela back to talk about the creative that they're not doing. So
yeah, we have a comment here saying that Janela was a dark mainstay. His last Dynamite match, I think, was against Hangman like 6 months ago, and if memory serves me correctly, I do believe it was that long ago, which is kind of crazy. We have a couple super chats here. First, from Terry Allen Jr., who he says, was Scott Hall soft-spoken, love the outsider theme. Do either of you know Scott personally? Did you get a chance to interview him?
I mean, I've spoken with Scott personally. I've met Scott in person. Really cool guy, but you know, he's going to be different with wrestlers he's worked with and friends. I mean, he's had real life fights. You know, he had a famous fight with the Nasty Boys. You know, again, he was always super cool with me. And you know, he doesn't really like the wrestling media. So I remember being a little nervous with Scott when the first time we spoke, and he was super cool. We've had him on a couple times after that. Always really nice. But you know, like with anyone, he had his demons in the past, and he had his issues. But it's hard to find someone that so many people in the industry love. And I think today you see so many of the young talents, because they would talk to Scott Hall at the Performance Center, and he'd come in and talk to talents, and he was always really giving with his time and really supportive. And I think, you know, he changed a lot of the stuff he had back in the day, and I think he was a really positive force, for a lot of people.
Justin, how about you? Any Scott Hall stories?
Yeah, it's we touched on some. I don't want to rehash all of it, but I mean, like, yeah, I was fortunate I got to be around him in a lot of different situations. I would never really classify him as soft spoken, but he had just different moods. I saw him. I had been backstage at independent shows and picked his brain or watch him giving other people advice. I saw him in that role. I saw him being filmed by ESPN when they were doing a documentary on him. I saw him in more private situations, at the bar or restaurant, and he definitely, kind of to what Raj said, who he's around and the familiarity certainly is going to just change the tone. That's kind of probably pretty universal for anybody. But the common thing is Scott always had a sense of humor. Whether he knew you or not, and sometimes it was even funnier if he really didn't know you, that he would the things that he would say that the people that are familiar with him, and a lot of them have become pretty famous in the last couple of days about, kicking out of your finish. That, like, if you knew him, you just knew it was Scott, right? But if you were somebody meeting him for the first time and you hear him say this, and especially if you're the inferior one, which chances are you are, you're kind of like, is this a test? Am I supposed to like say something smart ass back to him? So all the different situations that I was around him, he always had a personality. I saw the volume level alter. But I would never really classify him as soft-spoken, no.
I love to hear these stories, too. And I love, as you mentioned, too, Raj, not many people are so universally loved in the wrestling community. And to see Scott Hall getting nothing but praise is lovely to see. One more comment based on the Janela situation, again, from Issa. Thank you so much. What's worse, getting ghosted or getting a call from People Power? So, yeah, what's worse between the two options? Raj, any preference between getting ghosted by a boss or getting a future endeavor call?
Justin, you got a Laurinaitis impression? Mine is Bruce Pritchard doing Laurinaitis, so I only got one. But
Raj, Johnny Ace here. Afraid to tell you, your services no longer needed. We're cutting you effectively tomorrow. People Power.
Gotta go. Talk to you later.
Yeah, Johnny Ace is hard. It's hard to that raspiness is hard to recreate. It hurts.
Yeah, okay. Mine just hurt from doing that 2 seconds.
Yeah, I would try one, but I want to continue with this show and keep my voice intact. But yeah, future endeavors, brutal call, but getting ghosted, not exactly ideal, considering I like to be in the know. It's better to know than to not know. So I don't know. Who knows what will happen with AEW going forward? Maybe they will get a John Laurinaitis of their own, and hopefully we get an impressionable voice from them as well.
I will say I do prefer getting a call, even if it's from Laurinaitis, because you could definitely make your plans. Because then you're not wondering, well, what if they're gonna call me, or what if they're just busy and they don't know? At least you just know you have that finality. That's my personal preference.
For sure. Well, let's move on to some ratings news, something we cover every single week on the Thursday night edition of the Wrestling Inc. podcast. First up, Monday Night Raw with 1.7 million viewers this week, a 0.48 in that key demo of 18 to 49, and number 2 on the cable top 150, down 4% from last week's viewership, up 6.7% from last week's 0.45 in the key demo, and down very slightly from last week's number 1 spot in the cable top 150. Raj, I'll go to you first. You're the numbers guru here on the podcast. What do you make of these numbers for WWE on the road to WrestleMania?
Yeah, on the surface, there's not too much to it. It was down a little bit in viewers, but the 18 to 49 was one of their better numbers of the year so far. One thing that was interesting is that how the first hour lost to the second hour and the third hour. Usually the first hour is the highest rated, then the second, and then the third, usually there's a big fall off. So it was like the first time since June that the third hour of Raw beat the first hour.
And what does that tell you? And what does that tell you? That the fact that the audience was growing as the hours go on. Oh my God, it's actually going to happen. Here's the big, if you follow Wrestling Inc. every week, but you don't necessarily watch Raw live, and then you hear or you show up on Twitter and see that they've pushed it to, here's what the main event is in the stipulation, and you're hearing people chant Cody, you're like, oh, here it comes.
Yeah.
That's what it tells me.
There is that. There is also, it was daylight savings time, and usually you do see more of a, not as big of a gap from hour 1 to hour 3, but you rarely ever see hour 1 to hour 3. So I definitely think the Cody thing definitely had a part to do with it. It was one of the rare weeks, without football, that Raw wasn't number 1 on TV. NBA beat it barely, but the NBA beat it. So. And the NBA beats it regularly, when the playoffs didn't happen and everything. But for now, it was a rare week, but still, a good number for Raw for where they've been.
Before we move on, big super chat here from Joel Wood. Thank you so much, Joel, for $10. He says, if you get a call to be released, at least you get likely 90 days to get your stuff in order and still get paid. If you get ghosted, you may not have any time to prepare yourself at all. He makes a good point. Exactly what we were kind of saying. I think the preference of having that time to get your situation in order definitely makes sense.
And the only problem with that, sorry, Liam.
Yeah, I was going back to you.
The only problem with that's getting released, and it's one thing if you get a call for your contract not to be renewed, at least you were kind of expecting to be there that period. Or, with getting a release, that could happen once you've signed just 2 months ago, or so there is a bit of a difference with that. But yes, I do agree that being given a 90-day notice that you're not being renewed is the ideal situation if you're not staying with the company.
Mm-hmm. Justin, I'll give you a little anecdote too, because you mentioned something interesting with the viewership going up. When I was tuning into Monday Night Raw, I was at a friend's house. We're sitting around a fire, a nice 50-degree evening, able to be outside for once and enjoy the weather while also roasting some marshmallows. And as soon as that segment came up about Seth Rollins saying he was going to the ring, I said, guys, we got to go inside. We got to put on Monday Night Raw. And I never do that. Raw has very rarely become appointment television for me. If I'm sitting down and it's 8 o'clock, sure, I'll turn it on. But if I'm busy, I'm going to catch the highlights on YouTube the next day. And so to have something like that grow as the hours go on, grow as the weeks go on. I feel like people have been tuning in to Raw just to see if Cody shows up with no other interest in any other segment. To see it actually have some numbers behind it, not just be for the diehard audience, I think that is pretty telling. So, Justin, I'll go to you with some AEW viewership, though. 993K this week, up 5% from last week's 945. A 0.38 in that 18 to 49 demo, which is down 5% from last week's 0.4. And number 6 on the cable top 150, which is down from last week's number 1. Justin, your overall thoughts on AEW's numbers this week?
I mean, the demo stuff's always hard for me to tell what is dictating that. But I mean, just the overall viewership being up. I mean, this was a show that had a lot advertised for it. 2 title matches. So I just felt like, this was just really well advertised what they had. So, I mean, I guess the viewership being up, I'm not surprised. Again, where it ranks week to week, with dealing with, coverage of a war, national coverage of a war, March Madness getting ready to start, a hockey season's going on. It's always hard for me to tell where they're going to fall each Wednesday for what reason. But yeah, I'm glad to see this number was up because, again, with how much they had building into this Dynamite, I would hope so. I would be worried if the overall viewership was down.
Yeah, and they were up against in the NCAA and the NBA, and they're always up against the NBA. So the NCAA would kind of be the new competition. The Hardys' first match back. It was the first episode since the Hardys came back. I think Dynamite is just kind of where Dynamite's at. That million viewer mark, give or take, 50,000. And then that 0.40 mark. And, this week it was one of their lower 18 to 49 demo ratings of the year. They did a 0.38. It was their fourth lowest of the year. Overall viewers was kind of in the middle of what they've done since the move to TNT. But, these are, if you're going to compare them to Raw, you just really can't. It's AEW is kind of its own animal, but for what it's, for being the top on cable some weeks and just being right behind the NBA, it's, I would consider these good, and they're up year to year. Of course, I mention this every week. Last year at this time, they had NXT competition. Once NXT moved, there was a big change in the numbers. So, and we're going to stop seeing that NXT bump in a couple of weeks. And they also have the big lead in. But overall, they are still up year to year. And that's a good thing for a wrestling promotion.
We have another super chat here from Joel Wood, a $5 super chat. Thank you so much, Joel. He says, Justin and Raj, both of you think that Cody Rhodes shows up at Mania 38? Also, it is way too late in your life to have just seen Rocky 3, Justin. So Joel doesn't care about what I think about Cody Rhodes showing up at Mania, but he wants to go to you guys. Justin, I'll go to you first. Do you think Cody Rhodes does show up at Mania 38? And if he does, is this his debut?
No, if he's at WrestleMania 38, I think it's advertised. I think, and I really do think the deadline's got to be this Monday. You got 2 Raws left. So I think if he's going to be at Mania 38, you're going to know about it. It's going to be the advertised match of he and Seth Rollins. If that's not it, I think then everything else is possible. Maybe you're looking at the night after Mania, because that's always a big night for a reset in their calendar. But I don't see them doing the Seth Rollins has a mystery opponent tune into WrestleMania and find out. I just think that me personally, I'm big on, while surprises are nice, at the same time, it's one thing to have like the worst kept secret and CM Punk show up again on an AEW Dynamite or an AEW Rampage. Yeah, thank you. Where again, it's everybody in the wrestling community, so it's a worst kept secret. WrestleMania 2 nights in Cowboy Stadium. WrestleMania is always built on grabbing people that maybe that's the one wrestling show they watch each year, both attending and watching at home. So I think you just need to spell things out. WrestleMania just doesn't build on see who the surprise opponent's going to be. You need to spell things out. Even if it was Seth Rollins calling out Cody Rhodes, which is why is he going to do that? Because Cody, it would still be he would be calling out and he'd be waiting to see if he shows up again. Much like Raj and I've talked about John Cena calling out the Undertaker. So I think in this case you want to advertise Cody Rhodes. You want to advertise he's going to have a match. So for that, he could be at Mania 38, but it would not be his debut. His debut on television, re-debut, I should say.
If I'm a betting man, I think Cody Rhodes is at WrestleMania, and I am a betting man. I don't know where to put that money, but yeah, I do think he'll be there, and I think it'll be Seth. And if it's not, I think it's Raw the Monday night after.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Seth, but I think it's going to be an open challenge. I think they're going to wait, and I don't think that they view Cody as being someone who's going to bring in pay-per-view buys. I think they already see that happening with new audience members, with your Logan Pauls, with your Pat McAfees, with your Stone Cold returning. I think they already have enough to bring in those once-a-year viewers per se, or not pay-per-view buys, I should say, Peacock subscriptions. I think they can still afford to do a Seth Rollins WrestleMania Open Challenge, and then we kind of go from there.
Well, and to your point, Liam, they don't gain anything from Peacock buys. if they get extra Peacock buys or a ton extra, they don't get any incentive. So it'd be the ticket sales. And I think you might be right. I could see Vince thinking that Cody would not move ticket sales. So it might be better to be a surprise. I could see that, but I do think he'll be at WrestleMania.
And one more thing from Joel Wood, who keeps sending in so many super chats. Thank you so much, Joel. He says the Hardys at Mania 33. Yeah, that was the comparison I was thinking of. The only difference there, though, is that was something that was only speculated on the internet. Like, that match was set. It was a triple threat tag team ladder match, and then we made it a fatal four-way, and the Hardys showed up. If you advertise Seth Rollins as having an open challenge where he only wants a nightmare of an opponent, do the worst kept secret thing, but not CM Punk on Rampage, Cody Rhodes at WrestleMania, I think it could work much to the success of what the Hardys was at Mania 33.
Yeah, and like you said, Liam, Joel, that you're right. That there was no there's another team. Nobody knew there's another team publicly until the New Day comes out and says that. The Hardys also had part of it too was, the Hardys were, parties were in Pittsburgh a month earlier, getting all their medical and all their stuff that WWE requires the talent to do. So WWE knew that they had the Hardys for weeks in advance. But part of the deal was the Hardys were adamant about finishing up the other gigs that they had. They had they had a match the night before WrestleMania. They had other gigs, Mania leading up to and the weekend of Mania, and they were adamant about finishing them. They also thought, let us, if we pull out of these, it's a huge red flag to the wrestling world. Let us finish these. It's going to make the appearance that much cooler, which in fact it was. And then, oh, by the way, they made their debuts. This is something not everybody necessarily knows. They 5 days or 6 days after WrestleMania 33, they were scheduled to be here wrestling in Pittsburgh for us at IWC at a big show that we do each year. And they were sure that everything was going to be fine. Well, they make their debut. Place goes crazy. It's still renowned as one of the greatest Mania pops ever. Mm-hmm. Vince was so taken aback and impressed by the pop. The next day, Matt Hardy tells us, we're not going to be able to do the show. And I said, I thought we had this covered. But then he ends up talking to the office, blah, blah, blah. Moral of the story, I get back at Pittsburgh a day or two later, and Matt tells us, okay, we can do the show, but we can't work the match. So we can do the meet and greet, we can do a promo, we can put over, we can do everything to satisfy the audience and ticket buyers and blah, 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 meet and greet, but we can't bump. Vince does not want to risk us getting hurt. So, my point telling you that little backstory is Cody could, maybe Vince doesn't think Cody is going to move numbers or whatever, so we don't need to advertise him. Cody could show up, and this could be the most buzzed about thing in a 2-night Mania, and Vince might all of a sudden have Cody winning the world title a week later. So you just don't know. Literally, that's how fast this could change.
Yeah. I like that anecdote. And Joel Wood, another super chat. Thank you so much, Joel. He says, Undertaker versus John Cena at Mania 34 is the precedent I should have used for Seth, not the Hardys. Well, I think both work in what he's going for, but I think that there is a way to kind of merge the two in the sense of making it an open challenge. Not Seth calling out Cody, because I just don't see how that makes storyline sense, because he's calling out an AEW guy, and we don't expect him to say AEW on WWE programming. But still, I think that there's a way to kind of meet in the middle. I think we should venture now into the entertainment world. I know you guys are both buzzing to talk about this movie. Before we get there, though, another super chat. These super chats are just rolling in.
Thank you, guys.
Steven says, does Rock close WrestleMania with a stare down with Roman? A follow-up question I have for either of you. Has the Stone Cold segment been announced for night one?
Night one.
Yeah.
Okay. For that reason, I do think Rock closes night two. I don't think they put both Rock and Stone Cold on the same night, but man, talk about two visuals on 2 nights of Mania. Raj, what are your thoughts?
I have my doubts, just because I could see them not wanting to promote a WrestleMania main event that they're not sure they can deliver on. And I just don't think Rock versus Roman next year is a short thing, because Rock has so much going on. He's going to be running a freaking football league at that point. Mm-hmm. There's just so much going on that I don't think they'd be 100%. And that's almost something you save for later in the year when you're more certain that it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. It seems like it's the perfect thing. Roman is just on such a roll with his title. I mean, he's up there now in the top 5 of title runs in length. Next year's Mania is in LA. I mean, that's the Rock's town. So it all lines up that it should happen. But like Raj said, it just seems like, and it's crazy to think, but that you can't get him to say for absolute sure that in 12 months, I'm absolutely going to be able to do this particular day. But that's just how in demand and how many factors that could change the schedule. So I'd love to see it. It'd be a huge end. And look, we've seen them with The Rock advertise a Mania a year out. We saw it with the John Cena stuff where they would advertise a Mania main event 12 months out. So it's not unprecedented, but even then, that was back 10 years ago, and The Rock is even bigger of a star than he was then. So
he opened the Super Bowl, he opened the Olympics, he introduced Team USA at the Olympics. He's another level of star now. So
I will say the reason why I'm going to bet with my heart and not my head on this one is because Roman's reign right now feels very comic booky in the sense that every time he beats someone, he gets a little post-credit scene. John Cena shows up at Money in the Bank. Hey, I'm your next opponent. Brock Lesnar shows up at the end of SummerSlam. Hey, I'm your next opponent. What bigger post-credit scene to close WrestleMania than The Rock showing up after Roman beats Lesnar, hopefully clean, hopefully establishing him as unprecedented levels of dominance. If you smell Rock stare down, I don't know. I think that could be money.
I almost think if you do it, you almost have to do it as soon as you can, like SummerSlam or Money in the Bank. Those are stadium shows.
True.
But I almost think you can't count on it for Mania. So if you do it, you want to get that match done, sooner rather than later, even though that's a WrestleMania dream match.
It's a dream match, much like Clubber Lang versus Rocky. That's a transition for you. Rocky 3, we're talking it here on the Wrestling Inc. podcast. Raj, I know it's something you've wanted to do for a very long time. I'm not too familiar with the beef about Justin not having seen this movie, but I've been following it on socials as close as I can. And I have seen Rocky 3. I recently revisited it in preparation for this podcast, but I feel like my attachment to this movie is much less significant than, say, Raj's. So, Raj, I want to ask you off the top, what is your Rocky story?
Well, I just think Rocky in general, the Rocky series, is pro wrestling. You have your baby face, your colorful heels, the booking of it, how you book the baby face. Ultimately, the baby face wins. And then, the colorful heels along the way, and how all the booking makes sense. And it just is pro wrestling. And so that's why I'll have so many analogies at times when, they bring someone in and they beat them. Like when they brought in Karrion Kross and beat him right off the bat. And it's like, in a Rocky movie, you're not going to have Clubber Lang come in and lose his first match. I mean, that's just bad storytelling. And I always felt like Rocky was the perfect pro wrestling series, even though it's not pro wrestling.
And, I have to agree. So I watched, the only other thing I'd ever seen, obviously people, I haven't been living under a rock. I know the Rocky music. I know who Apollo Creed, I knew all the basic stuff, but the only other Rocky thing I'd ever watched is I watched Creed a couple years ago. And watching Creed and not having seen any of the original Rockies, but they kind of basically give you what you need to know. And I still enjoyed Creed. And so I was that made me willing to do this homework assignment from Raj. And having just seen Rocky 3, I can absolutely see what Raj means. I mean, it absolutely felt pro wrestling with it, almost to the point of where one of the notes I wrote after it was done, I was like, this movie was just so basic but simple but effective. Like it wasn't very complicated. It's like Rocky's high on top. Rocky's gonna leave like a Terry Funk. Yep, they're gonna pull him back in. He's cocky. He loses. He trains again. Comes back. I mean, it's a very just basic thing.
And his old number one nemesis trains him.
Right. It was really fun. I'll tell you what. I know part of why we want to do Rocky 3 because it has the pro wrestling crossover. So Hogan, so Thunderlips. The thing I found interesting, and I'll give you the order of what I saw this, is so I'm watching this match, the whole thing with, it's supposed to be like the publicity stunt, right? Of, he and Thunderlips and Rocky wants to kind of just, let's put on a show. Thunderlips is, kicking his ass. And then I'm just going to call him Hogan. That sounds ridiculous, say Thunderlips. And then Hogan's cool with him. Hogan's cool with him after the fact, is willing to take a picture. And he just says, he's like, that's the name of the game. Basically, it's saying like about how you'll work. And I find this so interesting because this is the movie's set in 1981. I think that's when they said that. I think that's what the gravestone says for when Mick dies. But this movie comes out in 82, right? 1982. So for wrestling fans that don't have the historic reference, this is still 3 years before WrestleMania. This is the same year that Vince McMahon, that buys the company from his father, the same calendar year. And so wrestling is still very much it's real. There is no the sports entertainment yet. I found it very interesting that Hogan is on this number one movie, basically just saying this is all a big show coming from the pro wrestling world. And then as I look more into it, I knew that Hogan was fired from Vince Sr. And it turns out this is the movie, and him doing these scenes, it went against, I guess, his contract, and that's why Vince Sr. fired him. And then, of course, Vince Jr. famously rehires him later, and then makes him the focal point of WrestleMania 1. I said this is just fascinating to me that Hogan basically is basically talking about kayfabe in 1982 in a box office thriller.
Yeah, real quick, a couple of chats here. Ryan Ramirez saying, "Love the show, guys. Rocky 3 is the best one of them all." And Mario Morales saying, "I hated Rocky 3 because we never got the Rocky versus Thunder Lips rematch." Justin, to that point, when we're talking about Hogan in the movie, how much of it did you know going in? Like, you knew he was in it. You probably knew his name was Thunder Lips, right?
I knew.
But did you know, like, the scene was kind of that long? Like,
No.
it was okay.
No, nope. I knew he was Thunder Lips. I knew that he was in it. I didn't know. I didn't know how it was going to be. I didn't know if he was going to be a reoccurring character the whole movie. Didn't know anything.
Yeah, so apparently that whole scene took 10 days to film. That part where Rocky throws Hogan out of the ring, he couldn't lift him, so Hogan had to basically jump in his arms, and Stallone tossed him. But Stallone, doing his own stuntman work. Hogan, they pretty much did that whole thing. They weren't using stuntman stuff for that whole sequence.
It was wild too to see like Stallone looks small compared to Hulk Hogan, which is crazy because he was absolutely shredded come Rocky 3. Rocky 1 and 2, he's buff, but he's not as cut. And in this movie, he is cut. He's got kind of the movie star hair too. But yeah, standing opposite Thunder Lips, Hulk Hogan, it was just kind of shocking to see a little bit of the size difference. I will say though, compared to the previous Rocky movies, this one does kind of dive a little bit more into the campy side of things. I understand why pro wrestling fans love it. And for that reason, I went in with a pro wrestling mindset, a pro wrestling lens, and I found a lot of enjoyment in, as you mentioned, the former nemesis is the one that trains him against the new arch enemy, which I think is really cool. Stellar Justin Lopez sending in a super chat. Thank you so much, Justin. Always tuning in to the Thursday night streams. He says Rocky basically became Apollo in this movie. He let fame and money get to him, which ultimately led to him underestimating his opponent. I love that analysis, and I see Raj nodding his head along. Anything you want to add to Justin's point?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the parallels were there, and yeah, because they open with that whole sequence when Eye of the Tiger is playing, and you have him, and that's a lot of that's actual footage, like Stallone with the Muppets. That was an actual appearance Stallone did on the Muppet Show. So a lot of that was actual Stallone footage that they used, and they didn't create it for this movie. But yeah, I mean, it totally was, and I thought it was a great parallel to Rocky 1. This was, when when I was talking with Justin, and we were talking about like the first Rocky movie for him to watch, and it's one of those. Rocky 1 won Best Picture. It's a classic, but it also, for a lot of people, it's a little slow now. For them to watch it the first time, and I know because I'm trying to get a lot of people to watch it, and they do, and they usually like it, but usually it's 3 and 4 that are they're the fast paced. Rocky 4 is like a music video, but they're fast paced, easy to watch. They don't drag, and that's kind of why I chose this one.
Yeah, no, it moved. It was easy to watch. It was. Yeah, it was fun, and I love digging into movies. Any movie, I love digging into the behind the scenes or the trivia. I was reading about how apparently, Carl Weathers, who plays Apollo, apparently him and Mr. T legitimately didn't see eye to eye when filming. They were having problems, and so they apparently had some kind of dispute or blow up off camera, and then not long after, the director says action, and that's when it's the first matchup between Clubber Lang and Rocky. And Apollo, who's doing commentary, walks to the corner of Clubber, and Clubber he goes to shake his hand, and Clubber apparently that there was that was a little more aggressive than it was called for in the script. It was real life tensions kind of bleeding into the movie. So I don't know, all this stuff's fascinating. I'm glad I watched it. I really am, and I will now. At some point, I'll go watch 1 and 2 just to get myself back in line.
You got to watch 4 as well. And then once you watch 4, you got to watch Creed 2 because they're tied together.
Yeah, I want to see 4 because apparently 3 was supposed to be it. Stallone said 3 was it, and then I guess because 3 did so well, Stallone's all right, let's keep it going.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and 4 was supposed to be it, and then so was 5, and then so
same thing with the Police Academy movies.
Right. But what's funny with Mr. T, I saw that too with him and Apollo not getting along during the movie. This is Mr. T's first movie. He apparently there were over 1,000 people that auditioned for that role. So it's surprising that he would kind of risk, his first big movie opportunity by getting into it with Creed, but with Carl Weathers. But apparently there was some tension there. Another interesting thing, because I'm a big Karate Kid fan, is that "You're the Best" from the ending fight scene in Karate Kid. That was originally meant for this movie, and then Stallone decided to can it for Eye of the Tiger. So if someone is great at doing video and can ever do Rocky 3 opening with "You're the Best" instead of Eye of the Tiger, make sure to send that to us. Or retweet.
That'd be very fun. We have another super chat here from Justin. Once again, thank you so much, Justin. He says, "You're 100% correct, Liam. The quality of Rocky movies dropped off after this. I know we all love Rocky 4, but it's a bad movie with flaws." It's been a minute since I've seen Rocky 4, Raj. I feel like it's fresher in your brain because I feel like you've probably watched it so many times. What are your thoughts on Rocky 4?
Well, I actually just recently watched Rocky versus Drago, which was the Stallone recut it and re-edited it. And it's actually a better movie if you're looking at it as just a movie. But Rocky 4 is one of those movies you could just work out to. There's not much dialogue in between, like montages, and it's just a slice of the 80s, like at its extremes. And so it's great for that.
I love that. That's fun. Maybe a future edition of the Wrestling Inc. podcast on Thursdays, we dive into Rocky 4. But you mentioned too, Creed is one of my favorite movies of the 2010s. I thought that little franchise they have going on with Michael B. Jordan, which I think they're working on a third one. Don't quote me on that just yet, because I know Ryan Coogler is busy with Black Panther these days. So it's kind of all in Michael B. Jordan's realm. But the first Creed movie, I really enjoyed. And the second one is also a very worthy sequel. So I feel like the current Rocky franchise has a bit of adrenaline going these days. So it is cool to kind of go back and see where it all began, see the foundational aspects. And I also just love seeing how passionate you get, Raj, about these movies, because it reminds me of like how I feel about the Marvel movies. And it's a generational thing of like the different genres of film and how you kind of get attached to them as a child. And it just kind of grows with you, which I think is really neat.
Yeah, no, I love these movies. I could watch them anytime. And the great thing with 3 also is it's kind of right in the middle of the end of the 70s and the coming of the 80s. Granted, it came out in 82, but there was still some 70s-ish stuff in there. Like the first training montage when he's basically doing this media blitz and Mickey's getting irritated. It's got like a 70s theme to it, and then you also got Eye of the Tiger in this movie, which is just 80s greatness. And so it kind of has both, and which made it kind of fun.
Justin, before we wrap this up, I want to get your biggest takeaway from your Rocky 3 viewing experience, because I know you've been nagged on to watch this movie for a very long time. Did it live up to the months, years of hype that's been building?
No, it did. Like I said, it's easy to watch. It's like, hour and a half, it's easy to watch. It moves fast, as you guys are noting earlier. So it wasn't hard to get through. There was never a point where I was like, picking up my phone, bored, whatever. Like, it was entertaining. I have my biggest takeaway. I've heard like the quotes and things like that. Stallone's accent, the Italian stallion Philadelphia accent, especially when they're on the beach out in California, and it looks like it looks like Apollo's just gonna give up on him. Rocky doesn't have it, and Adrian's like interrogating him to get him to open up about his fears and what he's feeling. Him just trying to open up and be that intense and that emotional, but he's still in the accent. It's just ridiculous. Like, at one point, I rewound like 1 minute. I know the dialogue for the next minute. I rewound 60 seconds back, and I just shut my eyes and I just giggled listening to what he was saying.
Speaking of that, the second beach scene where they're training, Apollo threw that race, didn't he? Because when they're running, when Stallone's got his juice and everything, when he's all pumped up after the Adrian talk, they're running on the beach. Stallone's running, his face is like coming off, and Apollo, he looks like he's just jogging. I think he threw that race. I think he let Sly win.
Conspiracy.
Yeah.
My biggest takeaway is something that I don't know why I blanked on until the moment happened, because I've seen this movie before, is that ending scene. It's something that's done so much in film nowadays with just a freeze frame. We don't actually end up seeing who wins. And I believe they hit Eye of the Tiger as the credits roll once again. And I just thought it was cool because I did that like Leonardo DiCaprio gif where you sit up and you point, you're like, oh, that's the thing. That's the thing that all Hollywood films do these days. That's the trope. To see the trope's origins, I thought was pretty neat.
And it's revealed in Creed who won that fight, because it was never revealed until Creed, when Michael B. Jordan, he asked him in the diner, he's like, so who won that fight? And then Stallone said he did. So yeah,
that's right. Yeah, that line went right over my head. I haven't seen Creed in a while, but wow, yeah, I guess we do know. So
that's one thing when I watched Creed, I didn't understand what the hell they're saying.
We find out 30 years later.
Oh, I know.
Well, hey, now you know. And that's the Thursday night edition of the Wrestling Inc. podcast. Right as we cross the 1 hour mark, talking wrestling news, talking Rocky. We're going to have fun each and every week, breaking down things within the squared circle and outside of the squared circle. Raj, do you have something to say?
I was going to say, next week, we're not going to be doing one of these. Next week, it's going to be a special edition of the Wrestling Inc. podcast. And Justin, you can tell us more about it, but the return of CSR.
Yeah, the one night return. We're going to do Chair Shot Reality. It was a video podcast that myself and a great crew of people, we did for 8.5 years. It was a little bit ahead of its time when it started in 2010. But we haven't done it since 2018, and we're going to bring it back for one night. We've had a lot of awesome requests and fans, and we just figured, the landscape has changed so much since 2018, with AEW, and we'll be 9 days away from WrestleMania, 2-night WrestleMania with all the different things of Austin and maybe Cody. This felt like the right time to do it. So timing plus, Raj being nice enough to grant us the wrestling platforms for us to basically take over Thursday night. And also the biggest element really is that for 400 episodes, we shot them in a TV studio, which is great, great quality, but they were shot and they were post-produced and edited and put out over a weekend, each weekend. And this will be the first time we're gonna do it live. It'll be just like you're watching this now. It'll be live. You'll have the ability to have your comments be part of the conversation. And we had such a great fan base around the world, and we met so many of them over 8 years, from Australia to UK to wherever. So this will be a chance for us to engage with the entire world for the first time under the Chair Shot Reality brand. Have such a good time doing it with all you fans on all these other Wrestling podcasts on Mondays, on Wednesdays. So to do it in the CSR gimmick will be fun. So we're looking forward to it.
Big things. I'm excited to tune in myself. Justin, I was going to tout your social media and let you know you can let people know they can follow you at Justin LaBar and ask you what you got going on. But I guess that is kind of the big project. Anything outside of CSR returning next Thursday that you want to plug right now?
Yeah, the big CSR plug. We haven't settled on a time. Probably 8 p.m. is what we'll go with, the Eastern time. But that next Thursday. So we're looking back. We'll be sharing all kinds of videos on social. Luke Gallows doing his best Festus impression in a promo that we, Matt Hardy, Vince Russo, Britt Baker, who was a co-host to start out. We have so many great guests. We're trying to share as many videos to kind of remind people, take them down a trip down memory lane. So check that out next Thursday. But otherwise, besides Wrestling Inc. stuff, I'm on Busted Open as always tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Eastern if you listen live, or you can listen at any time on the SiriusXM Demand app. Myself, Dave LaGreca, Mark Henry, as we spar with LaBar is what the segment's called.
Big things. I love it. Raj, you can follow him at Raj Giri _303. Anything special you got going on with Wrestling Inc. that you want to shout out?
It's WrestleMania season, so there's just tons of stuff coming up. And also for this Thursday podcast, we're talking about other stuff we want. So definitely let us know. We're talking about maybe Scream, Succession, Dexter. So let us know what you want to see, and we'll try to pick one of those topics one of these Thursday nights.
Yeah, my homework list is just growing. I got to jump into Dexter. I got to finish Succession. I actually did start it, and I'm very much enjoying it so far. And Scream, that new one, I'll put it on the list as well. You can follow me on socials at below, at Liam T. Crowley. Make sure to support Wrestling Inc. both on the website and on social platforms, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Daily wrestling updates coming your way. And we got that cool clip from Rocky Romero talking about the potential New Japan AEW crossover going on that page very, very soon. But for all of us here, that's your Thursday night edition of the Wrestling Inc. podcast. Tune in tomorrow for a SmackDown review and next week for a Chair Shot Reality reunion. We'll see you next time.